welcome Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, Chairperson and Managing Director at Biocon. Kiran, thanks very much for joining us on NDTV Profit. We haven't really had a chance to have a proper full-blown conversation post the quarterly earnings. Do you think that, I'm going to use a phrase here and tell me if you agree with it, strong growth in research services, muted growth in biopharma. Do you agree with that description of Biocon's performance in the second quarter?
I'd like to basically respond to that comment by saying that yes, certainly I think Syngene, that is our research services business, has delivered a very strong quarter, a debut quarter which has shown 30% growth. But I do not think that you have to view the muted comment with respect to biopharma, because I think biopharma is a business that has grown in terms of its EBITDA margins, in terms of its profit contribution to Biocon numbers in a very, very solid way this quarter. And I think what you really need to look at is the fact that our R&D spend has jumped 64% this quarter, which is very indicative of the rapid progress that we are making in the clinic for all our lead biosimilar programs. I think these programs are hugely value accretive, and I believe that we are up in front amongst the front runners to address a $30 billion current market size for the kind of biosimilar programs that we are addressing. And we are on track to file for regulatory approval for hopefully 4 of these programs next fiscal.
I want to pick up a couple of things you've mentioned, and the first is the 64% increase in the R&D costs, and yet the EBITDA margins have improved despite the sharp increase. So I think the question that the street is asking is, can you sustain this margin performance?
Well, we certainly believe we can, because I think the product mix that I'm talking about is seeing a much bigger contribution from our insulins and biosimilars, and I think this is an upward trend. I believe that the APIs also are now being factored by high margin APIs like immunosuppressants. So I really believe that these are margins that we are going to sustain going forward. And I think if you normalize it with respect to R&D spends, you can see that our biopharma business is extremely profitable, and it is our biopharma business that is really enabling us to invest in these very, very expensive biosimilar programs, which most companies find it very difficult to address. So I think this is what the growth story of Biocon is all about.
So let's talk a little bit more about that growth story, and I mean biosimilars. 5 biosimilars have entered phase 3, of which 4 are undergoing global trials. What are the milestones here?
You know, like I mentioned, the 4 that are in advanced clinical trials are really our insulin glargine, our trastuzumab, our adalimumab, and pegfilgrastim. As I said, the combined market size of just these 4 biosimilar programs is over $30 billion. And, I think in terms of what it means in terms of milestones, I think a regulatory filing is a huge milestone. The moment we file with US FDA and EMEA, it's a big milestone for us. And I think here I just want to comment that the understanding and value ascribed to biosimilars is very different in India and outside India. And I think that's where the disconnect is. I think the investors in India, the analysts in India, do not see this as a big ticker or a big milestone. They basically want to see these numbers actually pan out in the marketplace, whereas I think in the West, they clearly see this as a signal of huge value opportunity going forward.
I just want to understand that opportunity, and here it has presented itself. The real potential of biosimilars, you said perhaps analysts here on the street don't understand it. What is happening globally in the biosimilars market, and how is Biocon placed to capitalize?
So if you look at some of the early entrants in this biosimilar space, which has happened in Europe and the US, with its first biosimilar, I can tell you in Europe there has been a huge steady uptake of biosimilars, and they are certainly gaining very, very good market share. I think, if you read analyst reports, it's very clear that within the next few years, I think it is evident and accepted that biosimilars are going to be a very, very large segment. So I think we have to look at, what the analysts say in terms of these opportunities, and I for one feel that the analysts are very optimistic. So I think, as far as Biocon is concerned, I think in the interim, even before we enter into the US and European markets, we have very, very large emerging market opportunities which are being addressed, and where we are getting several registrations, and some of the numbers that you're seeing today capture some of these high margin opportunities which have been translated in emerging markets.
The key emerging markets for Biocon's biosimilars portfolio, what are they?
Yeah, so I would say that the key emerging markets for us are Mexico, LATAM, Middle East, North Africa, and some of the CIS countries. These are the real big opportunities which we are addressing. And we are already seeing, that some of our registrations have actually garnered a lot of, good growth for us in all these markets.
Sure. The other, worry area is really the prices in the biopharma business and how they're holding up. There are fears around price erosion. Do you think those fears are valid at all?
Well, I think if you keep focusing on our historical statins business, certainly there has been price erosion. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think we are rapidly substituting these commoditizing APIs with much higher margin APIs, and with our biosimilars and insulins. So I think that's why you're seeing a steady improvement in EBITDA margins. And if you were to see the biopharma business normalized in terms of R&D spend, then you can actually see that we have a very high EBITDA, and it is because of a very profitable API business that we are able to actually support the very expensive biosimilars programs, each one of which almost costs you $100 million a piece.
Okay, I'm going to ask a larger question now, Kiran. Over the next 6 months, what are going to be your priorities personally, so that we get a sense of where Biocon is going over the next 6 months? I'm not asking a quarterly question. I'm not asking, a full year margin outlook. What are your personal priorities at Biocon going to be?
I think regulatory filings are top of the mind for all of us, because these are very important filings. It's not an easy task to get these filings into US FDA and EMEA, because there's a huge amount of preparation required in terms of submitting these regulatory dossiers. So that's top of the mind for us, because these are critical milestones for our future. In the other important focus point for us is certainly registrations in various emerging markets for our trastuzumab, for our glargine, and for our insulin. So I think that becomes extremely important. And the third big priority for us is basically the commercialization of our Malaysia facilities, which has just received a GMP certification from the Malaysian authorities. So getting that basically audited, inspected, and approved by US and EMEA are going to be also extremely important for us going forward.
I'm glad you mentioned the insulin facility in Malaysia. It's on track for filings in FY17?
Absolutely, because we've just received our first regulatory approval from the Malaysian authorities, which is maybe a month ahead of schedule. But we are on track to basically fully operationalize it by 2017.
Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV Profit. Appreciate your time, your insights, and look forward to talking with you more frequently. Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, Biocon.
Thanks, Manvi. Thanks.